Hello, miserable souls. It's Monday. Happy Monday. People groan and moan about Mondays because that means work, responsibility, and fluorescent lights that reminds you of a morgue. I like Mondays. They smell of inevitability. Today's story is about someone who made inevitability her career. Casey Anthony. If you've heard of her name before, your brain likely twitched with disgust. If you haven't, you've been living in blissful ignorance. Let me ruin that for you. Casey Anthony was born on March 19th, 1986, in Warren, Ohio. The kind of town that produces two things: bored teenagers and true crime fodder. Her parents, Sydney and George, were painfully ordinary. George was a cop and Sydney was a nurse. They had a son, Lee, and then had Casey. On paper, a family. In reality, a petri dish for dysfunction and disaster. From childhood, Casey developed two remarkable talents: being energetic and being dishonest. She lied when it hurt her, she lied when she didn't need to, and she just lied because I guess she thought it was fun and entertaining, and oxygen wasn't entertaining enough. Her parents noticed the pattern. She'd lie about leftovers that they'd ask her if she had eaten while having crumbs all over her lips, and like right there as evidence, she would be like, no, I didn't eat it. I don't know why she lied. I guess the truth wasn't entertaining enough for her and lies were more fun. Lying became her reflex, her comfort blanket, and her identity. Some kids collect dolls and stickers. Casey collected falsehoods. By the time high school came around, Casey's lies had matured. Her parents never knew where she was going, who she was with, or what she was doing when she left the house. She was basically a tenant instead of a daughter, and she lived with them spiritually, not physically. Casey's high school experience was an act of defiance against responsibility. Her parents thought they were raising a future nurse or lawyer, or at least someone capable of paying rent. What they got was a high school dropout in waiting. So Casey's parents had planned a graduation party for her. They printed invites, they ordered food, doing all this stuff for their daughter just to find out that she wasn't graduating. Woo! Go Casey. Obviously, the party was canceled, along with any illusions that George and Sydney had about raising a model citizen. School was irrelevant. She was majoring in lies and minoring and getting away with it. After high school abandoned her, Casey started working at Universal Studios in Orlando. That lasted as long as a bad extra in a horror movie. The important part wasn't that she worked there, it was that she pretended to work there long after she didn't. For Casey, Universal became her fantasy stage. Later on in the story, Casey is questioned by detectives. They asked her to lead them to her boss so that they could approve of her employment there, so that they could figure out if she was lying to them or not about working at Universal. So they walk in the hallways on and on and on, keep going around in circles and down the halls, this way, that way. Eventually, she turns around to the detectives and is like, I don't work here. The first and last time that she uttered honesty, because, you know, she's a liar. In 2005, Casey met Casey met Jesse Grund. He was a safe choice. He adored her, he wanted a family with her, he wanted stability. As you know, naturally for Casey, she wanted escape, the spotlight, and freedom. That same year of meeting Jesse, she discovered that she was pregnant. Yay! Oh, that's so great. A liar, a pathological liar, finds out she's pregnant. She hid her pregnancy for several months, wearing baggy clothes, like a cloak of secrecy, and keeping it away from her parents. She carried the secret as if denial could stop biology or something. When she finally told her parents about it, she suggested that she put the baby up for adoption. Sydney and George weren't having it. They were like, that's a no-go. That's such a bad image on our part, this, that, and the other. So they forbade it. The decision wasn't hers. The baby would stay in the family because the Anthony house was more worried about appearance than stability. Casey's baby would prove that they were still normal. On August 9th, 2005, Casey had a beautiful baby girl, Kaylee Marie Anthony. The child entered the world in innocence not knowing that she was already a pawn in her mother's game. The father, that was a mystery. Casey swore that it was Jesse, but DNA tests later proved that it was not. As you know, Casey, with her lies, she later then said that Casey's father had died in a car accident. Convenient, tragic, unverifiable. The truth, obviously, was buried somewhere in a web of her lies. A place even Casey probably forgot. Sydney and George embraced Kaylee as if she were theirs. They clothed her, they fed her, gave her a bedroom, everything that parents should be doing when they have a child. Kaylee became their second chance at parenting, a do-over for the failure that they call Casey. Casey, however, saw Kaylee as a costume. Some days she wore the role of a mother, and other days she would shed it to play party girl, leaving Sydney and George to clean up. This dynamic, grandparents raising their grandchild while their mother goes off and parties and does whatever, is a recipe for disaster. Sydney, for whatever reason, enabled Casey to do this stuff, leaving her daughter with her parents to take care of them like their own. Sydney covering up Casey's failures with a Febreze level denial. You'll understand that later on in the video. And George knew something smelled off, literally and figuratively, but he lacked the backbone to say anything. Kaylee grew up in a home where love came from her grandparents and neglect came from her mother. She was surrounded by love, but she was also surrounded by lies. And lies, like mold, spread silently until everything reeks. Casey was now a mother, but in name only. She couldn't reconcile responsibility with freedom. A baby didn't belong in nightclubs. A baby couldn't sleep at a DJ's house while her mother danced on countertops. But reality never stopped Casey. Whenever she needed an escape, she invented Zanny the nanny, the phantom caretaker, the fictional savior, the lie that would become her most infamous creation. So here we stand, a compulsive liar with a child she didn't want, and parents who cared more about appearances than the truth. A story already dripping with rot. Kaylee Anthony deserved a future. Instead, she inherited her mother's lies. And this is only the beginning. Kaylee didn't magically transform Casey into a mother. That would have required a conscience. What it did do was give Casey more material to lie about. Every con artist needs a good cover story. Casey's was Zanny the nanny. Supposedly, this elusive caretaker was the answer to Kaylee's whereabouts every time she was asked about, where's Kaylee? Oh, she's with Zanny the nanny. Why can't I talk to Kaylee? She's with Zanny the nanny. Casey wasn't neglecting her daughter. She had childcare. It was convenient, it was imaginative, it was also entirely fictional. Casey told her parents that Zanny had been introduced to her by a coworker named Jeff, an IT technician at Universal Studios. Jeff supposedly paid Zanny to watch his son, and by some bizarre arrangement, also Kaylee. Let's pause. Imagine being so generous that you pay a stranger to watch someone else's child. Sounds less like babysitting to me and more like trafficking, but Casey swore it was normal. So, whatever Casey says. Somehow, her parents believed her, too. She added flair to the lie, painting Zanny in detail. She described her as a 25-year-old, 5'7" Puerto Rican with perfect teeth and the kind of looks that were a 10. Imagine rating your imaginary nanny like a contestant in a beauty pageant. Casey didn't just lie, she staged entire fantasies populated by characters like Zanny the nanny, like a failing novelist who had confused reality with fiction. So no one besides Casey ever saw Zanny the nanny. No family, no friends, no neighbors, and Kaylee supposedly talked about Zanny the nanny's dog, but children repeat what they're told. The dog probably had as much existence as the nanny did. None. Sydney, Casey's mom, still accepted it. Belief was easier than confronting the truth. Meanwhile, Jesse still lingered in Casey's orbit. He believed that he was Kaylee's father. He wanted to marry Casey, and he wanted to do things right. He wanted to have a family and, just go on with life like every other normal person does. The DNA test shattered this illusion. Jesse wasn't the father. Surprise, surprise. The lie was exposed, but Jesse continued to stay. he was either noble or delusional. Probably both. By May 2006, Jesse ended Casey and his engagement. He divorced her, citing Casey's erratic behavior. Translation: he had realized that he married a pathological liar, spiraling into chaos. Casey's mask had slipped too far, even for him. But the breakup didn't derail her, it actually freed her. Casey no longer had to pretend at stability. She could return to what she loved most: deception, nightlife, and being the center of attention. By 2008, Casey started dating Tony, an aspiring DJ. Aspiring being the key word, a title that usually leads to unemployment. But to Casey, Tony represented music, freedom, and fun. Casey split her time between Tony's house and her parents' house, where Casey was loved, fed, clothed, and Tony's house, where she was an inconvenient guest. Casey played house with Kaylee, bringing over Kaylee to Tony's house every now and then to keep up her image. Her priorities were obvious though. She wanted nightlife, parties, and MySpace photos of her dancing on countertops. A 2-year-old obviously did not fit that aesthetic. So Kaylee stayed home with Sydney more and more while Casey drifted into her self-invented fantasies. Casey's life became a performance with rotating sets. At home with her parents, she was the struggling young mom with a demanding nanny. With Tony and her friends, she was the carefree party girl with no obligations. To the world, she pretended to be employed at Universal Studios. Every scene was built on lies. Lies about her job, lies about her boyfriend, and lies about Kaylee's care. The truth was an intruder that Casey kept locked out. Her parents suspected inconsistency, of course, but Sydney's love wasn't maternal, it was cosmetic. She preferred soothing over cracks than facing collapse. If Casey said that Kaylee was with the nanny, then Kaylee was with the nanny. If Casey said that she was working at Universal, she was working at Universal. Denial was the family's second language. George, her dad, the ex-cop, should have noticed more. He claimed later on that he smelled something rotten in more than one way. But George lacked conviction. His suspicions never became confrontation. So Casey was free to juggle her lies. She believed that no one could stop her, or that no one would. By early summer 2008, the stage was set. Casey had a boyfriend who didn't want a toddler around, and she had parents that were raising Kaylee more than she was. She also had a growing resentment towards a child that tethered her to responsibility. Every choice that Casey made screamed desperation for escape. Her double life, mother at home, wild child outside, was unsustainable. Lies eventually collapsed. June 15th, 2008 marked the beginning of the end. A heated argument broke out in the Anthony house. Sydney accused Casey of being irresponsible. Casey spit back with venom, and the house seethed with tension. The next day, Casey packed her bags and told her parents that she was leaving for a trip to Tampa, a work trip. Reality, there was no trip, there was no job, there was only Casey, her lies, and a child whose life was about to end. June 16, 2008 was the last day that Kaylee Anthony was seen alive. Casey Anthony had created a world of smoke and mirrors, imaginary jobs, imaginary nannies, imaginary stability. But lies don't raise children, lies don't feed toddlers, and lies do not erase responsibility. Casey was trapped between two lives that she couldn't sustain: the illusion of motherhood and the reality of selfishness. And when forced to choose, she chose herself. Always herself. Kaylee became collateral damage to Casey's fantasies, and soon the fantasy would reek of death. For the next month, Casey lived as if Kaylee didn't exist. She told her parents that Kaylee was with Zanny the nanny, as always. She also told Tony, her DJ boyfriend, that Kaylee was also with Zanny the nanny. And Zanny became the black hole in which Kaylee vanished, a convenient fiction swallowing a human life. Casey stayed at Tony's apartment as if she were childless. She entered hot body contests at clubs, she posted on MySpace of her dancing on countertops, and she partied like responsibility had never touched her, which in her mind it hadn't. Her parents called constantly asking to speak with Kaylee, and every time that they did, Casey had a different excuse. She was either with Zanny the nanny, or she was sleeping, or they had just missed her. Lies like lullabies, designed to soothe but ringing hollow. As days turned into weeks, suspicion began to boil. Sydney, ever desperate to speak to her grandchild, grew uneasy. George, the ex-cop with fading instincts, started sniffing out trouble, and soon the smell of trouble would be more literal than metaphorical. So, Casey had been driving her parents' Pontiac Sunfire. It was the only real asset that her parents trusted her with. Foolishly. One day, she drove to a check cashing store and it ran out of gas in the parking lot. She then left it there instead of going to get gas for the car. Casey was as reliable as maintaining a vehicle as she was telling the truth. She left it there just like she leaves everything else. Unattended, forgotten, and uncared for. One of the store employees noticed that the car had been there for a couple days, and so they called a tow truck to come move it. The car was hauled off to an impound lot. On June 30th, George got a call that his car was impounded. He went to retrieve it, not knowing that he was walking into a horror story. When George arrived at the tow yard to get the car, the attendant led him to the car, and once he opened the door, they both jumped back and recoiled from the car. The smell that wafted out of the car was undeniable, unforgettable, and unmistakable. It was the smell of death. Even the attendant, who had likely experienced all kind of sorts of decay and rot in these cars, knew what it was. He told George plainly it smelled like a dead body had been in that car. George, former cop, knew what it was too. His stomach turned and his denial wrestled with his experience. He knew deep down what it meant. He drove the car home, furious and shaken. Sydney came out to smell the car for herself. She too recoiled. But Sydney, ever committed to cosmetic explanations, doused the car in Febreze. She insisted that it must be rotting pizza in the trunk. Because as we all know, pizza famously decomposes into human hair, leaves stains the size of a small human, and produces chloroform. By mid-July, Sydney had reached her limit. She knew her daughter was lying. Kaylee was missing and the car reeked of death. She finally called 911. Sydney's first call was almost casual. She had reported that her money and her car were stolen, but in the second and third calls, she panicked and she cracked. She told the dispatchers that her granddaughter had been missing for a month and that the car had smelled like there had been a dead body in it. In the recording, her voice trembled as she said, "It smells like there's been a dead body in this damn car." Casey then took the phone from her mother, annoyed, and told the dispatchers that she knew where Kaylee was. She said that Kaylee was with Zanny the nanny. She said that she tried contacting Zanny, but that her number was out of service. She claimed that she had spoken to Kaylee on July 15th, just hours before. Lies stacked up on lies, wobbling like a collapsing tower. The dispatcher wasn't convinced, and police were sent. Casey's cards of lies began to collapse. Police pressed Casey for details like where Zanny lived and the last time that she dropped Kaylee off with Zanny. Casey led them to a place called Sawgrass Apartments. She then pointed out the exact apartment where Zanny resided confidently, telling the police that that's where Zanny had been, and that's where Kaylee had been as well, with Zanny. So officers went to the door and knocked. No answer. They then went and checked records, and believe it or not, nobody had resided there since March. They then checked surveillance footage and it showed no surveillance of the nanny, no Casey, no Kaylee, no nothing. Not Casey dropping Kaylee off with Zanny, not Zanny being there with Kaylee, nothing. The phantom nanny was exposed for what she had always been, smoke and mirrors. The unraveling wasn't done. Casey told the detectives that she had worked at Universal Studios. They then asked her to prove it, going to Universal and asking Kaylee to take them to her boss. With confidence, Casey walked through the entrance, past all the employees, past security, and into the hallways like she had belonged. The detectives humored her, letting her spin out her illusions. Finally, lost in the maze of offices, Casey stopped turned around, looked at the detectives, and in that moment of honesty, for the very first time for Casey, she said, "I don't work here." The mask slipped, the fantasy collapsed, and Casey was cornered. On July 16, 2008, Casey Anthony was arrested. She was arrested for child neglect, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. Meanwhile, forensic analysts and experts began examining the car. They found hair in the trunk, which had been forming a death band, which is a dark line that forms only when hair decomposes with the body. They found traces of chloroform, and they found stains consistent with decomposition. On the Anthony family computer, searches had shown that somebody was searching up how to make chloroform. Sydney, for whatever reason, took the blame and told the detectives and the forensic analysts and everybody else, police, everyone, that she was searching for chlorophyll because her dogs had ate some bamboo in the back of the yard. Unfortunately, the timestamps of when she looked it up proved that she was not home, but you know who was? Casey. Casey was home. The walls were closing in. Kaylee was gone. Casey was lying. The car, the computer, the evidence, all of it pointed to the unthinkable. And still, Casey's only concern was herself, of course. By July 2008, the Anthony family's facade was in shambles. Their granddaughter was missing. Their daughter was in jail. And the whole world was about to watch all of this unravel on live television. Casey Anthony's lies had been transparent, but now they smelled of death, and no amount of breeze could cover that up. By December 2008, 6 months had passed since anyone had seen Kaylee alive. The Florida heat had done its work. Whatever evidence Casey hadn't already erased was being slowly erased and consumed by the Florida heat and the bugs, but corpses, like secrets, don't stay buried forever. On December 11th, 2008, a man named Roy Kronk wandered into a wooded area less than a mile away from the Anthony home. He noticed something unusual. First, he thought it was just debris, and then when he looked closer, he realized that it was a skull, small, fragile, and unmistakably human. He prodded it with a stick. Some people call it tampering with evidence. I call it instinct. When faced with death, you either run or poke it with a stick. The skull had duct tape on it, and nearby there is a trash bag with bones in it. It also had a blanket with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet designs all over it, which is a blanket that you find in a children's room and not rotting in a swamp. Police later confirmed that this bag was identical to one that is sold only in pairs. And by their surprise, the matching bag was found in the Anthony's home. Whoever killed Kaylee didn't look far for supplies. It was already right there in the house. On December 19th, the DNA tests on the bones and the skull confirmed what everybody already expected. It was Kaylee. The charges escalated. Casey was no longer just a neglectful mother who had lied to the police. She was also now charged with first-degree murder. I mean, it should have been straightforward. The evidence was quite damning. Chloroform traces in the trunk, Kaylee's hair with a decomposition band, a stain the size of a toddler in the trunk carpet, internet searches for chloroform, Kaylee's skull with duct tape on it, and a matching laundry bag from the Anthony's home. Come on, people. All of these put together painted a picture as clear as an autopsy report, but clarity is wasted in a courtroom. The prosecution's theory was simple. Casey had knocked Kaylee out with chloroform, duct taped her mouth to suffocate. She then put her in the trunk where the decomposition began and later dumped her remains in the woods. Casey's motive was pretty obvious. She wanted freedom from motherhood. She wanted to party, dance in nightclubs, do whatever she wanted to do. She wanted to live like a teenager. In her twisted cost-benefit analysis, Kaylee's death was the answer. We now introduce you guys to Jose Baez. Baez? I don't know how to say his last name. I'm just guessing that's how you say it. Jose Baez, which is Casey's defense attorney. Yay, like she needs one of those. If the prosecution brought science, Jose brought a circus. The defense claimed that Kaylee had drowned in the family pool. They also said that George, Casey's father, had helped dispose of the body. Like, where did that come from, first of all? According to Bays, George had molested Casey as a child, which then led her to learn to lie about things as a survival mechanism. No evidence supported these claims. None, not a shred, like nada, nothing. But in a courtroom, sometimes drama can overpower data. Casey sat at the defense table, stoic and hollow-eyed. When she was shown pictures of Kaylee dead, she hardly even flinched. And when her father was accused of molesting her, she rolled her eyes. She wasn't crying, she wasn't panicking, she didn't seem nervous. She's just like dead inside. Watching her was like watching a sociopath who was studying for a role that she didn't even believe in. The trial began on May 24, 2011. Cameras captured every word, and the public devoured every moment. News anchors replayed it like a daytime soap opera, except for with higher ratings. The prosecution presented their mountain of evidence. The defense threw mud in hopes that some would stick. They painted George as a villain, Sydney as complicit, and Casey as a victim. Jurors sat through it, faces blank, and minds apparently mush. They weren't supposed to talk about it outside of the courtroom, but rumors swirled that some were talking about it outside of the courtroom. Allegedly, someone had sold details to a blogger. Integrity like Kaylee was missing. Here comes the fun part. On July 5th, 2011, after 6 months of testimony and 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned and the nation held its breath. Casey Anthony was found not guilty of murder. Not guilty of manslaughter. Not guilty of child abuse. The only thing she was guilty of is lying to the police. 4 misdemeanors, time served, and she walked free on July 17th, 2011. She walked free. Casey Anthony, the one who was found searching up chloroform on her computer, the one who was found with a matching trash bag that obviously Kaylee's matching blanket to her matching Winnie the Pooh room was found in the trash bag that matched the one in their house. Oh my God, it's just like all of this evidence, and she walked free. It makes me want to cry, dude. She walked free. Casey, if I catch you, Casey. Casey, if I catch you, Casey. Oh, let me stop. I'm so serious though. Don't ever let me see her outside in public. I don't know what I'd do. The courtroom gasped. The public erupted, and people screamed at their TVs whenever they found out that she was not guilty. Protesters stormed the streets, and commentators called it one of the greatest miscarriages of justice since O.J. Simpson. The jurors went into hiding, terrified of death threats. Their names were kept secrets for months, but eventually they were revealed. They claimed afterwards that the prosecution hadn't proved murder beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't know. I don't understand. This, it's right there in front of your face, dude. Like, who was the last person driving the car? Who was, like, the lies, the evidence, I can't say it enough. It's so clear as day. Like, any normal person, let alone the police, let alone jurors, let alone the judge, whatever, can clearly see that Casey killed her own daughter. Cold-blooded murdered her own daughter. Maybe they were like waiting for Casey to confess on MySpace or something. I don't know. Justice had been duct taped and buried with Kaylee. Casey Anthony's trial wasn't just a trial, it was a performance, a grotesque circus where lies were applauded louder than the truth. The defense twisted the narrative until fact and fiction were blurred, and the jury, unable or unwilling to cut through the fog, let a murderer walk free. The nation raged, Kaylee was dead and Casey was free. And the lesson is simple. In America, if you lie loudly enough, even murder can be rewritten. July 2011, Casey Anthony walked out of jail a free woman. The protesters outside weren't cheering. They were screaming, cursing, and throwing insults at Casey like jagged stones. For once, public outrage was entirely appropriate. As of Casey, like always, she didn't care. She never cares. Television producers pitched book deals and movie rights, and the same people who called Casey a monster also dangled paychecks in front of her face, eager to capitalize on the horror. The public was livid. They said boycott any network that pays her, which I completely agree, because why are you paying a murderer? She became infamous and despised and untouchable pretty much somehow. I don't care what the penalty is if I ever catch Casey out in public. But obviously for someone like Casey, she adored it. She adored the attention. She loved the attention that she was getting from these people. She soaked it in. She thought it was satisfying. Let's go back in the story. You guys remember Zanny the Nanny, right? Unfortunately for this lady named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who lived in Florida, her life was upended when Casey used her name in a police report. Suddenly, this innocent woman was linked to kidnapping and murder. Zenaida sued Casey for defamation. Unfortunately, the case was tossed out. Apparently, you can destroy someone's reputation with a lie as long as you're lying about everything. Justice once again failed. In 2017, new information surfaced. Searches of the family computer again showed searches for foolproof suffocation. The timing of the search made it very clear that it could have only been done while Casey was home. Even more suspicious, 48 hours before Casey was arrested, someone had deleted portions of browser history. As if lies weren't enough, now digital cover-ups had joined the party. In 2017, Casey had an interview. In the interview, she was asked when she had last seen Kaylee. Knowing Casey, she came up with a whole new story. She said that she remembers saying goodbye to her mother that morning, then going back to sleep, and when she woke up, Kaylee was gone. Her old lies had expired, so she stitched together new ones. Sydney has suggested that Kaylee suffered from a seizure and blacked out and died at that time. It's impressive, really. Even years later, Sydney kept making excuses and lies for her daughter and to protect her, excuses way more absurd than Casey's own. When asked how Casey felt about the public's hatred, she smiled and said that she slept fine at night, which, not surprising, parasites normally do. The interview even asked her how she thought Kaylee would be like at 12 years old, and she replied with a total badass. She laughed, adding that Kaylee would probably listen to classic rock music, play sports, and not take shit from anyone. The only badass move that Kaylee ever made was surviving 2 years under Casey's care before her own mother murdered her. After prison, Casey dabbled in photography. Not to take beautiful pictures or whatever, beauty was wasted with Casey, but she wanted to be a private investigator. Beats me. She claimed that her experiences in hiding lies, researching cover stories, and fabricating alibis gave her skills. Imagine hiring Casey Anthony to investigate dishonesty. It's like hiring a vampire to run a blood bank. How do you think that's gonna work out? Whether she actually pursued the career or not is unclear, but the very idea of it is nauseating and perfectly on brand. George and Sydney remained fractured. Sydney defended Casey to the end, clinging to denial like it was life support. She was ride or die for her daughter even when her daughter was guilty. George, however, was different. He denied the defense's accusation that he molested Casey. He also denied any involvement in Kaylee's death. He knew deep down that Casey was responsible. He carried the weight of it and was visibly broken. At one point, Overwhelmed by everything, George tried committing suicide. He wrote a note that ended with, "Kaylee, here I come." He survived, but barely. The family was shattered beyond repair. They had the dad trying to commit suicide. They had a daughter that had been to jail and prison and accused of murder. Just too much. The public never forgave Casey Anthony. People would see her out in public and hiss, and protesters camped outside of her parents' houses. People made shirts with Kaylee's name on it, and documentaries rehashed the evidence again and again, coming to the same conclusion that the justice system failed. Casey became a symbol, not of tragedy, of injustice. She was proof that lies, if told loudly enough, could override science, logic, and morality. She was proof that monsters don't hide under beds, they sit in courtrooms smirking. So, Casey Anthony, the woman who danced on countertops and partied as her baby girl's body decomposed in the trunk of her parents' car. She charmed her way through investigation, and the jury rewarded her with freedom. What happened to Kaylee was not mysterious. It was inevitable. A compulsive liar with no conscience, and a child she never wanted, and a family more obsessed with appearances than the truth. The ending was already written before Kaylee could even speak. Casey didn't just murder her daughter, she murdered the truth. She proved that you can lie so often that reality itself bends. She turned the legal system into a circus, the media into her stage, and her parents into props. She'll never be punished the way she should be. Prison would have been too merciful anyways. Instead, she lives carefree, carrying her own rotting soul like a dead body in a trunk. I just want to say rest in peace to Kaylee Anthony, whose only crime was being born to a mother who didn't deserve her. And as for Casey, I hope her freedom tastes like ash. I hope every laugh sounds hollow. And I hope every mirror that she looks into doesn't show her reflection, but her daughter's face. Because true punishment is not prison. True punishment is living with yourself when you are the monster. This case will never sit right with me. The fact that Casey continues to walk free on the face of planet Earth, just like, it reeks my soul. It honestly makes me want to cry. Not in like a sad way or a happy way. It's frustrating. It genuinely is, because it is so clear that Casey killed her own daughter. It is so clear that she murdered her own offspring. It's just, everything points to it. There's so much evidence. There's just so much about this case that's just, it doesn't sit right with me at all, and it never will. And I will never understand why Casey Anthony is not in prison to this day. I don't understand why Casey Anthony did not get life in prison for murdering her own daughter when it is so clear right there in front of your face that she did. Me and every other person around me will agree that Casey Anthony is not innocent, and that Casey Anthony murdered her own daughter. I hope that Casey Anthony rots in hell one day. I hope that they end up finding her guilty one day and sentence her to life in prison. And I hope that if that happens, that she gets beat in there. Because no mercy with me. There's no mercy with me, honestly. That's just how I feel about this whole situation. But I'm gonna end the video right here. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't be scared to leave a like and hit that big old red subscribe button. And, you know, if you want to, share with some friends. I would very much appreciate, you know, the extra views. Just trying to get started. And yeah, this is my first ever true crime video. If you enjoyed it, stay tuned for more. I'll see you guys next time.